In the Florida Today newsroom, I'm Matt Reed. Today we go in depth with a special guest. Phil Archer just won election as the first new state attorney for Brevard and Seminole counties in 28 years. No other politician holds as much power over your freedom or personal security as the region's top prosecutor. In our interview, Archer explains a new financial crimes task force he helped launch to tackle scams, corruption, and organized crime. He offers his take on cutting gun violence, and he updates us on two high-profile murder cases, including the tragic shooting last year of Sheriff's Deputy Barbara Pill. Well, first of all, congratulations on winning the race for state attorney.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
So now that you are the top dog in the office, what are the biggest management challenges or other sorts of leadership challenges that you are contending with right now?
You know, just dealing with all the personnel issues, you know, and making sure we got the right people in the right spots, and you know, dealing with all those issues on a day-to-day basis. I don't think I ever realized it was quite that extensive. You know, I've been working with the administration for a while, but until you're, you know, at the top, it's a whole new layer and level of issues dealing with the administration of the office.
How big is the operation?
It's you know, people forget sometimes that we're the biggest law firm, you know, in Brevard and Seminole County. We have about 117 attorneys, 267 total employees over 2 counties. So it's a huge law firm, and people kind of forget that.
Are there any sorts of changes or improvements that you see making in the near future?
Yeah, one of the things I did was I'm going through and interviewing every attorney, every division chief, trying to determine, you know, if there's some changes that we can make that make us even better. One of the most important things I did was promote Bill Respis, an attorney in our office, to chief trial attorney.
Okay.
And that's to have him be a little more involved on a day-to-day basis with the felony attorneys and the felony trials in our office, to be a little more aggressive and making sure we're taking the right cases to trial, and we have the right people in there, and being a little more hands-on than we have in the past. I still have a chief of operations, but he's kind of handling more of the administrative side and all the other duties. I can't believe he was being able to do them both anyway, because it's a huge you know, load for any one attorney to carry. So now I have a chief trial attorney, and I think that's going to be very important here in Brevard County.
Now, is that somebody who's going to be actually trying the cases in the courtroom, the big murder cases and that sort of thing, or is he more of a strategist and a manager and overseer of
He would hate that if I did that to him. He wants to continue doing trials. Bill's a very aggressive, very experienced attorney, so he'll continue to carry a smaller load. He'll carry some of the homicides, he'll carry some of the career criminals. He's been in charge of our career criminal unit and firearms cases for the last 4 or 5 years. And so it's basically doing the same thing he's doing, but giving him some more supervisory responsibilities.
One of the things that I know that Sheriff Wayne Ivey has talked about, I know that you talked about it on the campaign trail, was the potential creation of a financial crimes unit. What is that, and what would it do?
Well, I just recently talked with the sheriff this week, and basically it's a task force to bring in some investigators throughout the county. You know, one of the disadvantages of our county, because it's so long, it's hard sometimes to bring everybody to the table, but it's pulling in some investigators from some of the major departments, and also bringing in some retired volunteers. You know, we've been able to line up, Sheriff Ivey's been able to line up some people from IRS and some people that have some experience with financial crimes in general, Secret Service. And basically it's to look at some of the bigger frauds and scams that might be going on in the county, to investigate them through this task force. And what I've done is I've assigned an attorney to that task force, so they will meet regularly to examine those kind of cases that may be going on in our county. And so that once that's investigated by this super team of investigators, I mean, these are the best, some of the best of the best, then my prosecutors assigned there will have the experience to file that case and then take it into court.
So how does that attorney get that experience? Are they trained in this, or have you hired a corruption guy from Miami, or how
kind
does
of
that
both?
work?
I have an attorney that's been with us for about 8 years, so she's already an experienced felony prosecutor. She's been working in our elder services unit for about the last 2 years, handling those kind of cases. And a lot of these financial fraud cases, unfortunately, involve our seniors, some of our most vulnerable citizens. It's so sad. I mean, I think there's a special place in hell for people that rip off the elderly. And so she's got some experience with those kind of cases. She's the right person. She's got the right personality for it. And we're getting her some of that training. I'm sending her to a mortgage fraud seminar up in Jacksonville. and I'll send her some of the other white-collar crime seminars that are out there to kind of give her some of that training and background, because it can be some tough cases. You know, I've got prosecutors that love I call it the blood and gut type cases, you know, the ones they're used to dealing with, and you can give them those all day long. If I bring in a box, a white-collar crime case, because I used to handle these, and you bring in a box of files with financial documents and papers, they go white. You know, they just don't. They go pale. You know, it really bothers them. So it's finding that attorney that enjoys those kind of cases, or is not intimidated by them and wants to handle them. That's what you have to find, that right person for that, and I think she's going to do great. So.
Reporters are kind of the same way. Some of us like to listen to police scanners and run out to murder and mayhem, and others like me, we like to go and go through the file rooms and sit with the boxes, so to speak, and
right.
you know,
both important, but you know, it's just a different set of skills. Yeah. And so I think that by having that, you know, a lot of times when people go to the police department with a paper type case, or like economic crime or financial crime case, they're told a lot of times it's a civil matter.
Right.
I mean, I know you've heard that.
I've heard that 1,000 times.
I know we've had conversations back when you're doing a lot of the consumer reporting. Civil matter. Well, a lot of times they are civil matters. But there also might be crimes associated with those cases. And so what we're trying to do is we have that special task force. They'll be able to recognize the difference, and they'll have an attorney there that can help them sort through, yes, that is civil, but yes, that might be criminal. Let's look at this. Let's pull some bank records. Let's get some more statements, and then hopefully identify to get those people some relief.
What kind of cases are we talking about here? What sorts of things have happened in Brevard County generally that motivate you to do this?
You know, it runs the gamut of people, you know, ordering furniture and putting deposits on furniture and not getting their deposits back, and you know, you find out that the owner, you know, knew 6 months before he was going to file for bankruptcy and leave, but kept taking deposits, or storm shutters.
Sure.
You know, we've had those issues. Pool builders, you know, that took a lot of deposits, never finished construction. So a lot of those kind of scams and frauds, if they involve, you know, usually multiple victims. But it can be other things too, identity thefts that, you know, that go on a constant basis, or maybe a financial, a burglar ring, but a theft ring that's targeting, you know, certain stores in the area, you know, whether it's a Lowe's or Target or something like that. It might be some kind of theft rings. Any crimes that really have a major impact financially. And we're trying to target those that have a significant impact or multiple persons.
I see.
You know, the last case I handled involved a gentleman that didn't pay the payroll taxes for a group of individuals. And it was about 55, 60 small businesses, and so it was, you know, close to $1 million in losses. So that would have been a great case for a task force to kind of take and go with. So.
What about public corruption? I mean, you hear about sometimes some shenanigans that go on with contracting, maybe a city or a school board, or somebody fires somebody. I don't know, is it criminal? I mean, is that the kind of thing that you would look at?
Ultimately, that may be something that we would look at through that task force. Right now, we have the luxury, I would think, the FDLE has a public corruption unit.
Okay.
And I prefer right now to refer those cases to them for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're experienced in public corruption cases, and those are difficult cases. Number two, they can bring investigators from outside the area. I think that's a real benefit. There's a couple cases now pending that we're working with them. We've met with them 3 or 4 times, but it involves investigators from outside the area that don't have any ties to the local officials that they might be investigating. I think that's kind of important. So for right now, we prefer to use FDLE. They're, you know, wonderful investigators. Down the road, possibly. And it's possible that if they have a case that they turn over to us, that may be assigned to that white-collar crime attorney. I may assign her. But for right now, all corruption cases are going to be assigned to my chief assistant, Wayne Holmes. So
okay.
That's how important I think they are.
Who is the woman that you said is?
Laura Moody.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
we'll look for her
name
in the headlines
we'll
sometime in the future. Let's talk about gun crime.
Yeah.
Because I know that you were involved with Operation Ceasefire.
Absolutely.
A task force. Explain that.
What we started back in 2002 with an initiative under Project Safe Neighborhoods. It came down President Bush at the time, and it was a directive for the federal authorities, the U.S. Attorney's offices, to work with local prosecutors and local law enforcement to go after gun crimes and strictly firearm-related crimes. So we started in 2002 with that partnership. And in 2004, we started a task force of all the, most of the major local police departments. It's led by ATF. We have DEA, we have FBI, we have all, the Sheriff's Department, FDLE. We have all those agents assigned. We meet every week in Brevard County and review every firearm crime in Brevard County for that week. And we make a determination, do we want to keep this in the state system? Do we want to go federal prosecution? And we also work on proactive investigations.
Right.
Is there certain areas that need some investigations, some groups that we can target for prosecution?
So when you're going over these cases, are you looking for people who, like suspects who are repeat offenders, bad seeds, they've got a record that makes them scarier than others, or is it the severity of the crime that you think ought to be converted into a federal case, something like that?
Yes. I mean, what we do, we review a case and say, okay, if that person stays in the state system, what are they likely to face? Versus if they go in the federal system, what potential penalties do they face? So a lot of times we're looking at the best penalty that might be involved. But sometimes it's not just the penalty, it's how quick it can go. In the federal system, because they don't have as many cases, once the person is indicted, they pretty much either plea or go to trial in 70 days. They don't grant continuances over there very much. So
right.
A lot of times we will try to get a case prosecuted federally just because it's quicker, and it helps send out a message that, from arrest, pled, sentenced, and sent off to a prison. And it's another part of the punishment, hopefully a prison out of state.
I see. So you really are sequestering the small number of people who are responsible for the worst crimes someplace other than...
Right. Because what happens a lot of times, they go to the local prisons and they see the same people sometimes. Their families can come and visit. They can keep up with what's going on. They can actually, we've had people try to keep the gangs directed from inside. So in the federal system, we always request and we try to get them to send them to prisons from all over the country, which they can do.
Hard to run the crack ring from Kansas.
It's very much, yeah. So it's another penalty that we try to incorporate.
Well, there's been a lot of talk now about how do you prevent these kind of rampage killings or other sorts of gun violence. Right. The president announced an initiative. He's hoping for some legislation to come down that controls assault or tactical weapons. But background checks, also some executive orders dealing with mental health, that kind of things. Of all of that, is there anything that you think is promising or could work?
Who knows? In this political climate, they can't seem to agree on anything. So I'm not sure that anything's going to come out of that. I try to keep out of that and say, my focus is going to be, let's use the laws that we have and go after the armed offenders. Let's go after the bad guys. If they use a firearm in a crime, let's really hit them hard. Or if they're a convicted felon and they're caught with a firearm, I'd like to see those penalties increase also.
What kind of firearms do they use most frequently in crimes around here?
Handguns.
Okay.
I mean, really the handguns, and that's why it seems exciting to talk about assault weapons and the rifles and so forth, but they're used in a very small percentage of crimes. Doesn't mean that maybe they're going to look at that and maybe that any crime is too much.
Right.
It's no comfort to someone that's shot with one of those rifles, but handguns are a big part of the most crimes. So.
Mental health information is something that's really critical. What do you know about how much or whether mental health information goes into our system for background checks or screens or that kind of thing?
They don't, and I think that is the biggest, I think that's where we could probably do the most good, is try to come up with a system to identify those that have reached out and had to obtain some kind of mental health treatment.
Right.
But of course, that's the catch-22. If they know they're going to lose their rights to firearms, are they going to seek treatment if they're going to be somehow put on this system? But I really believe we've got to come up with a way that if it's only a temporary loss of your gun rights, if you're committed, even if it's a short-term commitment, or if you could voluntarily do that. I've had cases in the past where the person was caught with multiple firearms, not because of a particular crime, but because they were distraught, call for service because they were, acting suicidal or whatever it might be.
Building an arsenal, getting ready to do something.
And there might be a crime associated with it, but it's not the type of crime, no prior record. Are we going to adjudicate them guilty of a felony just to keep them from having a firearm? And I've had to wrestle with that before, where I had a person that was a young person. It was like the only way to keep them from ever having a firearm again was really adjudicate them guilty of a felony.
Right.
Well, that destroys their record, destroys their future as far as job prospects. You know, I mean, that's a heavy blow to land on somebody just to keep them from ever having a firearm. So I wish they would come up with some way, you know, where you could voluntarily give up that particular right for a certain period of time, so that, you know, you could at least ensure that maybe for the next 5 years or 10 years that maybe, you know, they would hopefully get that kind of counseling. But
kind of like the Homeland Security do not fly list.
Kind of a new do not fly, something in between.
Watch list for right now.
Something in between, because right now that there's not a good mechanism to try to those that need. Yeah. They're in that situation where it might be a temporary situation, loss of a loved one, or a marital issue, temporary drug issue, that, you know, for the next few years we need to keep them from having access to firearms. So at least being able to go in and buy one, or if you catch them with a firearm later, then there's some penalties involved.
One of the biggest news stories in the past year or two here in Brevard County was the shooting death of Deputy Barbara Pill. Yeah. A couple of suspects in that case. What do we know about the prosecution of those two suspects at this point? Well,
I can tell you, you know, I can't talk too much because it's a pending case, but I can tell you that that crime affected us all, the community, law enforcement, obviously the family, Pill family, immensely. That's a horrific crime, horrific, and I can assure you that our office is going to go to the fullest extent of the law in that case against both of them. And you know, it was a good article in the paper the other day to kind of tie that in with the access to firearms and how the gentleman.
Somebody had, just to try to get some money or something, had stolen
the firearm, yeah, and then traded it for some crack and some money. And I appreciate y'all making that a very front page story, because I think that sends that message out to young people, because you see that a lot of times. Most of the firearms that are involved in these crimes are because they were stolen, or, you know, through a burglary, or then traded for on the street.
It's an opportunistic thing.
It's an opportunistic. And I think it sends a message out there to people. If you steal a firearm and you trade it away or give it away or whatever it might be, you know, here's what can happen. Here's the serious consequences. So it was just a horrible event. But
what? So you're seeking the death penalty against what's his name? It's Bradley, I think.
Yes.
It was. And then there's also a young woman who was riding along in the car.
Correct.
Probably not her, though. Correct?
No, she would not qualify probably for the death penalty with her.
But that's still, what is that called? Felony murder, because
yes,
you're there.
Yeah, she's a principal.
Committing a felony, or you had committed a robbery or felony or something like that.
Correct.
Alleged at this point.
Alleged.
It hasn't been.
Correct.
Okay. One of the things I wanted to ask you, because you've got such deep insight, is what do you think the biggest social problem is today that may correlate to the crime that you see just across the board? Is it drugs? Is it?
You know, I wish I knew. I mean, I get a lot of the, for all the community work that I did for many, many years, I always I'd ask people that, you know, out in the community, and I would see a lot of grandmothers coming in that were raising their grandchildren because the parents weren't there. And
yeah.
I really, you know, I think the greatest thing has been the disintegration of the family. You know, a lot of these, you know, I always amazed when people say, well, all kids today have the same opportunities and they're growing up with the same, you know, opportunities available to them in school.
If you have one parent, not two, that's a completely different economic situation than somebody with two.
Yeah, it's just you know, a lot of these kids that are growing up they don't have one or two parents; they have grandparents.
Right.
You know, there are so many families that are out there that are grandparents that are raising their children. You know, they're in their 70s and 80s, and so I think just the breakdown of the family structure and the family unit. You know, there's not that same structure that you or I had maybe,
yeah,
or some other people have, and so a lot of I think you're seeing that a lot of times with the criminals that we have, that there's some dysfunction in their family structure.
I want to move on to another topic, and it was something that came up I think a year or two ago, but there was a gentleman, William Dillon, who had spent almost 3 decades in prison for a murder that it turns out he didn't commit, or at least he's been cleared of doing that and he's been freed. The sheriff's office under Jack Parker did an investigation, found 3 or 4 other suspects potentially, but they haven't heard anything since then. Where does that whole thing stand?
Well, that case was referred up to the 7th Circuit, up into the State Attorney's Office up in Volusia County, and under executive order to allow them to review that case and the investigation that was done by the Sheriff's Department, including past investigations, you know, and all the information that has been discovered since then.
Yeah.
And
now, was it referred up there because the Brevard Seminole State Attorney's Office had been the original prosecutors on the case?
Yes,
okay.
I think
so
it was
to avoid
felt
any kind of appearance of conflict.
exactly. Get a fresh set of eyes, new
Okay.
set of eyes. Let them, you know, look at it and let them review it with this new report. And they did that. They recently concluded that investigation and determined there wasn't enough evidence at this time for them to file charges against anybody else for that particular homicide.
I see.
A lot of because of the age of the case, a lot of the witnesses have either died or are not available.
Certainly the physical evidence is.
A lot of the physical evidence was not available, and just some of the witnesses, their credibility might be an issue at trial, and that's a lot of things that, as a prosecutor, you have to look at. Not only is there probable cause, but is there a reasonable likelihood of success at trial? And
I see.
So it's kind of a tough burden.
But that's that state attorney's decision, not yours.
That's correct.
Okay. I was looking at, well, you know what, how do you prevent a case like that from happening again? I mean, if something like that comes up and somebody says, hey, we got this guy that's in prison, we think that maybe somebody else did it or it was different, or we may have DNA evidence, what do you do?
You take it as serious as you can. You know, I've often told people that of the two decisions I will make in this office, the two most important ones are number one, whether to seek the death penalty, and number two is how we handle cases of alleged innocence.
Okay.
I think it's that I can't imagine a worse thing than going to prison for a crime you didn't commit. I mean, it's just beyond comprehension. I think you and I would both agree on that. And so I think you have to get on those very quickly. You assign experienced prosecutors and your own investigators to look at the evidence that's being alleged. And by God, if we can have DNA testing, let's do it. You know, do it quick. You know, I think nowadays everybody expects if there's evidence that can be tested and we can do DNA, then why not do it? Do it quickly, you know, and check it out. Understanding that the prisons are full of a lot of people that say they didn't do it. You know, so you have to kind of, there's a protection of the community. We have a safeguard the community. We're not just going to let somebody out just because they say they didn't do it. But if there's some evidence that they're presenting and there's some basis for it, you've got to work on it extremely, it's extremely important. You got to work on it quick and let's test it.
Do you watch your conviction rates? I know some attorneys get concerned about that. I used to cover the courts. They debate it in political campaigns and that kind of a thing. How about here?
You know, that's the problem right there. They debated in political campaigns, and you know, I know over in one of the circuits over in Middle District or over in Orlando, that became an issue. You have to be really careful with that. As a prosecutor, I could have 100% conviction rates with my attorneys. We just take the best cases to trial, and you know, we'd always win those. So it's a balancing. You have to balance. You know, your best cases are going to plead or should plead anyway. So it's those marginal cases you have to make a decision.
Because you have the evidence.
You have the evidence. They're going to plead. So it's taking those marginal cases that you believe that you have a reasonable chance of success at trial and going ahead and going for it. You know, the problem is, as I said, so it's kind of a weird thing to debate about conviction rates because I think they can be, you know, manipulated to some degree. What you do want to do is look at the success of an attorney in the courtroom and find out if he's losing a lot of cases, why is he losing them?
I see.
You know, is he losing them because he wasn't prepared? Is he losing them because the witnesses weren't prepared? Is he losing them because he's just not a good trial attorney? Or is it just they're tough cases and you got the best evidence out, you put the facts on and the jury decided, you know, to go a different way? I don't have any problem with that, and I think law enforcement, and I've talked with law enforcement about that, they would like us to be more aggressive. They would like us to take more cases to trial, and you know, so it's kind of a balancing, trying to take the right cases to trial, make sure you got the facts. But I don't have any problem with my attorneys taking a case to trial and losing it as long as they were prepared and they put the case on in the right fashion.
What percentage of cases wind up going to trial?
Very few.
I mean, I've served on jury duty, and most of the people I know wind up getting excused at some point or another.
I think it was like 1% or something. I think last year we had, oh gosh, I want to say about 100 cases went to trial. About 100 cases, I think, went to trial, and we had about 12,000 filed or something like that. I mean, so it's a very small percentage of cases that actually go to trial. So.
How do you must have a lot of young prosecutors. I was looking it up online. It looks like an entry-level assistant state attorney earns $39,000, about the same as a school teacher. Is turnover an issue for you?
It's funny. It hasn't been lately. I mean, traditionally, an attorney comes with our office as a beginning attorney, and they stay 1.5 to maybe 3 years, and that's about the time when they decide whether to go out in private practice to make the big money, or it's just not for them and they want to go try a different type of law. And so that's usually when you have some turnover. We've been extremely fortunate. We've got misdemeanor attorneys that have been there, 3, 4, or 5 years. Yeah. And a lot of it's because of the economy. I mean, it sounds bad to say it, but the economy's been good to us. Yeah, economy's been good to us because there's not been those positions out there in private practice, so we're getting some really good attorneys that are applying for jobs, and we're having attorneys that are staying there. And of course that's bad too because they're not able to move up. One of the things you do as an attorney after a couple of years, you want to get into felonies and you want to get up to where you're handling those homicide cases or the armed robbery cases. You want to move up. So it's kind of a friction there sometimes when we have too many people staying because then they can't move up. So.
Career advancement
promotion,
that's something that's important to everybody.
Absolutely.
You're not a career politician by any means. No. Did you enjoy the campaign?
To some degree. I don't enjoy, and I'm sure every politician, the money, trying to go out and ask for contributions. I have never been one to ask people for money, and it was horrible. Sometimes people see you coming and maybe turn the other way, and you have to assure them, no, I'm not looking for a contribution. But I had a great team behind me, and they took care of a lot of putting together those kind of fundraising events so that I could just kind of show up and thank people, but they were kind of helping me, with some of the fundraising. But overall, it was a very positive experience. So just getting out and meeting people and just getting the input about what's important to them, whether it was white-collar crime or identity thefts or armed robbery or, what do they want to see out of this office.
How would you describe your personal leadership style compared to Norm Wolfinger?
I'm probably he's probably a little more micromanager, hands-on than I am. My philosophy has always been find good people, tell them your vision, tell them what you kind of want, and then let them go to work and do it. And I've never been one of those that interfere with how they get the job done as long as they get it done. So it's probably a little different. I know Norm was, he just liked to be involved in lots of things. He liked to have the final word on stuff, which is good. It's his management style. Mine's just a little different.
Thank you for joining us, and good luck.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Remember, you can share your opinion on anything you heard on today's program or have read in Florida Today by writing to us at letters@floridatoday.com. That's our program. I'll see you right here next Wednesday on WBCC and floridatoday.com.